The smell of money has a very specific quality inside a place like Maison Cartier. It isn't perfume. Exactly. It's the sum of many things, aged oak and dry-aged beef. The faint mineral bite of chilled French champagne. The ghost of cigars smoked in a private room 3 floors above the dining hall. It clings to the curtains and the upholstered booths, and the server uniforms pressed so crisply they could cut paper. Maggie Truesdale had worked inside that smell for 11 years. She knew every inch of Maison Cartier the way a ship's captain knows the bones of her vessel, which floorboard near table 19 had a hollow echo underfoot, which ventilation duct above the bar carried whispers from the private dining suite on the mezzanine, which regular tipped in cash, and which ones paid with cards registered to holding companies that didn't technically exist. The restaurant sat at the base of a glass tower in downtown Dallas. Its reservation list, A, who's who of Texas oil money, state legislators, and men whose business cards listed occupations like consultant and logistics director, but whose actual occupations were far less printable. Maggie was 37 years old, 5 feet 4, and built, as her late grandmother had cheerfully said, like a woman meant to last. She had warm brown eyes. Dark hair she kept pinned back under a neat bun, and the particular brand of body confidence that comes not from loving yourself in a magazine cover way, but from simply having inhabited your own skin long enough to stop fighting it. She wore a size 18. She knew it. She didn't spend any energy worrying about it. At Maison Cartier, that made her invisible in a very specific and very useful way. The clientele wanted their service staff elegant and forgettable. The men who ate there, and it was almost always men, or men with beautiful companions who were decorative and mostly silent, wanted the experience of being waited on by people who did not exist outside the frame of their table. Servers were furniture. Furniture didn't gossip. Furniture didn't remember. Maggie remembered absolutely everything. On a rainy Thursday evening in early March, the temperature outside had dropped sharply after a warm Dallas afternoon, and the inside of Maison Cartier hummed with its usual controlled electricity. Maggie was running Section 5 that night, a cluster of 4 tables closest to the restaurant's back wall. The section that management assigned to the team's best servers because it caught overflow from the 3 private booths that lined the east side of the dining room. Booth 2 had been reserved under the name Callaway Holdings. Every senior member of the floor staff knew whose reservation that actually was. Vincent Mara. You did not get to be Vincent Mara without understanding how rooms worked. At 51, he had the kind of stillness that made people nervous, not the stillness of a man at rest, but the stillness of something very large and very fast that happened to be pausing at this particular moment. He ran the Mara freight and logistics operation, which had legitimate contracts with 3 major shipping ports and wholly illegitimate relationships with half the distribution networks moving untaxed product through the Southwest. He had survived 2 federal investigations, a car bomb in Scottsdale, and a power struggle that had left 4 of his rivals in situations that were tactfully described in court documents as unresolved disappearances. He was also, Maggie knew from years of observation, scrupulously polite to service staff. He said please. He said thank you. He made eye contact when he ordered, which sounds like nothing. But in a restaurant full of men who pointed at menu items and spoke over your head, it was something. The previous December, he had handed Maggie a card, just a small ivory card. Non-name on it. Just a phone number, and told her that if she ever needed anything, she was to call that number and mention his name. and it would be taken care of. She had put the card in her kitchen drawer at home and forgotten about it. She did not think she would ever need it. She had been wrong about that. Mera arrived at 6:15 p.m. with a woman named Sabrina Drexel. Maggie knew Sabrina from 2 previous visits, both in the last 4 months. She was the kind of beautiful that required significant maintenance, porcelain skin, copper blonde hair worn loose past her shoulders, the sort of cheekbones that made other women exhale quietly in defeat. She came from textile money, old enough to be called legacy, new enough to be called debt. She wore a deep burgundy gown with a structured bodice, and she moved through the dining room like someone who had spent years being photographed and had learned to treat every entrance as a frame. Maggie brought sparkling water and a bread service at 6:22. She poured Vincent's glass first, then Sabrina's. Standard protocol. As she lifted the carafe away from Sabrina's glass, she glanced down, not intentionally. Just the way the eyes move through space when the hands are busy, and she saw the screen of Sabrina's phone, which was lying face up on the white linen. Its screen still lit from a recent notification. The message read, "Confirmed. Stay east of the table when it starts." Maggie set the carafe down on the service trolley with both hands, because her right hand had started, very quietly, to shake. She retreated to the service corridor. Her mind was running the way it ran when she was in the weeds on a busy Saturday night fast. Clean. No wasted motion. Cataloging everything at once, she started over from the beginning, reprocessing everything she had already seen tonight through a different lens. The 2 men in the corner table near the hostess station. They had been seated when Maggie started her shift at 5, which meant they had been there for over an hour, which meant they were not eating dinner. Their table had 2 tumblers of whiskey that had not moved in 40 minutes. The men were in suits that fit badly across the shoulders, not because the suits were cheap, but because the shoulders were doing work. The suits hadn't been tailored to accommodate. Their eyes were not on each other. Their eyes were on the mirrored wall panel that gave a clear reflection of booth 2. The man at the bar, he was mid-40s. Salt and pepper stubble, wearing a grey wool blazer that was too warm for the weather. He had ordered a club soda at 5:50 and had not touched it. His left hand was in his jacket pocket. He hadn't looked at the bartender once since he sat down. Maggie recognized him. It took her 40 seconds of rapid mental searching before it surfaced a local news segment she'd watched in late January. A piece about organized crime pressure on the Fort Worth distribution corridor. His name had appeared on screen for approximately 4 seconds below a photograph. Gerald Fitch, associated with the Sandoval network out of San Antonio, which had lost its primary trucking contract in DFW after Mara's operation had moved in and systematically absorbed it. This was not a dinner. This was a finalization. And Sabrina Drexel, with her copper hair and her stay east of the table instruction, had built the trap and gift-wrapped the man sitting across from her in burgundy and candlelight. Maggie pressed her back against the stainless steel of the prep counter and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. She was not a brave person, she decided. In the way that brave people are usually depicted in stories, she didn't feel a surge of courage, didn't feel righteous or certain. What she felt was a very specific, very cold clarity. The kind that comes not from heroism but from the simple mechanical fact that she was the only person in this building who knew what was about to happen and was not part of making it happen. Also, and this was the part she couldn't fully articulate to herself in the moment, though she would think about it many times in the months that followed, Vincent Mara had said please when he ordered his water. He had said please and he had tipped the line cook who'd broken his collarbone last spring so generously that the man had cried in the employee bathroom. You could be a criminal and still be the kind of person who noticed the people other people didn't see. Maggie was not going to let him be shot over his dinner because his girlfriend had sold him to clear somebody else's debt. She pulled the slim order pad from her apron pocket and tore off the bottom strip of a blank ticket, a piece of thermal paper about 3 inches by 2, the kind that curled slightly at the edges. She borrowed a pen from the clip on the trolley. She pressed the paper flat against the steel counter and wrote quickly, in tight block capitals, "Sabrina, set you up. Stay east of the table when it starts. 2 shooters, corner, table, by door. 3rd man at the bar. Grey jacket." She folded the paper into quarters. She pressed it flat between her palm and the base of her left thumb, the way she palmed a folded cash tip when the front-of-house manager was watching. Maggie, her supervisor, Diane, materialized at her elbow. Table 5 needs a check run, and booth 2's mains are up. On it, Maggie said. She picked up the 2 plates, a pan-seared halibut for Sabrina, a dry-aged bone-in strip for Vincent, and walked back into the dining room. The room had changed in the 11 minutes. She'd been gone. Not visibly. Not in any way that would register to anyone who wasn't already looking for it. But the calibration was different. The 2 men at the corner table had shifted their weight forward. The man at the bar had taken his hand out of his pocket and placed it flat on the rail. Sabrina was laughing at something, tipping her head back. But the laugh was slightly too bright. A performance, running at the wrong tempo. Maggie set the halibut in front of Sabrina first booth service protocol. Guest, on the left. Then she crossed to Vincent's side and set the strip steak down. Your steak, Mr. Marra. Medium rare as requested. Thank you, Maggie, he said, and looked up at her, which is when she did it. She reached forward to straighten the edge of his knife, which didn't need straightening, and used the motion to press the folded note flat against the base of his water glass with her thumb, leaving it there as she withdrew her hand. His eyes dropped to the glass. They came back up to her face. Maggie held his gaze for exactly 1 second. No smile. No not. Nothing that anyone watching from the bar or the corner table would clock as communication. And then she turned and walked back to the service corridor at her usual pace. The unhurried, slightly heavy stride that 11 years of booth service had made completely automatic. From behind the half wall of the service station, she watched. Vincent Marra had survived for a very long time, in rooms designed to kill him. He did not react. He picked up his fork, cut a piece of steak, and ate it. He said something to Sabrina that made her laugh again, more naturally this time. Then he picked up his water glass, took a sip, and when he set it back down, the note was gone. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, on 5. She saw it, the faintest shift in the architecture of his posture, a millimeter of additional tension across the shoulders, the jaw muscles making a tiny, silent decision. He set his fork down. He picked up his phone. He typed something. Sabrina said, "Everything all right? Perfect." Vincent said, "Just thinking about something." The man at the bar stood up. It happened fast after that. And it happened slow, the way violence always does in Maggie's memory of that night fast, in real time. Slow, in recollection, as though the brain refuses to let it go by at actual speed. Vincent's hand moved to Sabrina's wrist across the table. catching it before she could slide sideways out of the booth toward the east wall. "Sabrina," he said, very quietly. "Whose brother is it?" The color left her face in one clean sheet. "I don't know what you... Stay exactly where you are." The man in the gray blazer was 15 feet away, when three things happened in extremely rapid sequence. The two men at the corner table stood up. Maggie screamed "gun" at the absolute top of her lungs, and Vincent Mara threw the entire contents of the ice water carafe directly into Gerald Fitch's face. The dining room erupted. Maggie had already dropped behind the service station and pulled Diane down with her. One arm wrapped around the smaller woman's shoulders. She heard two suppressed shots flat. Mechanical sounds. Nothing like the movies and the musical crash of a chandelier drop ornament hitting the floor, and a man's voice swearing in a sustained, uninventive way. And then the louder sounds of running feet and overturned furniture and people in very expensive clothing discovering exactly how fast they could move when properly motivated. It lasted, Maggie estimated later, somewhere between 20 and 45 seconds. By the time she raised her head above the edge of the service station, Vincent was standing in the center of the dining room with the controlled, slightly elevated breathing of a man who had done something extremely physical and was now doing the harder work of being very calm about it. Gerald Fitch was face down on the floor, with his wrists zip-tied behind him, using what appeared to be a length of the decorative cord from the booth curtains. The two men from the corner table were seated against the east wall, not going anywhere. Sabrina was still in the booth. She had not moved. Vincent looked across the wreckage of Maison Cartier until his eyes found Maggie behind the service station. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he put two fingers to his temple and tapped. Once. Slowly. The police arrived 9 minutes later. Maggie spent 3 nights convinced she was going to die. She lay on her couch in her apartment in the Oak Lawn neighborhood and listened to the building's pipes settle at 2 a.m. and told herself every creak was something else, and didn't entirely believe herself. She had given a statement to a Detective Briggs that consisted entirely of things she had not actually seen. I was in the service corridor. I heard noise. I hid behind the station. I didn't see anything clearly. I was terrified, and Detective Briggs had written something in his notebook and moved on to the next witness with the speed of a man who did not expect the overweight waitress to have anything useful to add. On the 4th night, a car was outside her building when she came back from the grocery store. Black Suburban. Windows. Dark. Engine running. Maggie stood on the sidewalk in the drizzle for about 4 seconds. Then the rear window came down 2 inches, and a man's voice said, "Ms. Truesdale, my name is Calvin. Mr. Mara would like to express his gratitude in person. If you're willing." She was not willing. She got in anyway. They drove for 40 minutes into the northern suburbs, past gates that opened without Calvin making any visible signal, up a curved stone drive to a house that was large enough to be described as an estate without anyone arguing about it. She was shown into a study that smelled of leather and old paper and something smoky and expensive that turned out to be a glass of 18-year bourbon that was placed in her hand almost immediately upon entry. Vincent Mara was standing by a window that looked out at a garden, his back to her when she walked in. He was wearing a dark green sweater and dark trousers. He looked, she thought, like a man who was much more tired than his reputation allowed him to be. He turned. He looked at her for a moment, and then he said, "You could have done nothing." "Yes," Maggie said. "You could have hid and gone home and pretended you didn't see anything. Also, yes. Why didn't you?" Maggie thought about this for a moment. She took a sip of the bourbon. which was extraordinary and entirely wasted on her because her hands were still unsteady. "You say thank you," she said finally. Vincent looked at her. "When I pour your water, you say thank you." Half the people in that dining room have never once looked at me directly. You look at me. You say please and thank you, and you tipped Danny Ochoa in the kitchen $400 when his truck broke down last fall. Danny Ochoa broke his arm. Not his truck. His truck also broke down. He told me. Something moved in Vincent's expression. Not a smile exactly. "But the place where one was considering arriving, you're a criminal." Maggie said, "I'm not pretending you're not. But you're not the kind of person who gets to be shot over dinner because his girlfriend was settling her brother's gambling debts." The silence in the study was very complete. Vincent set his glass down on the desk, walked behind it, and sat down. He opened a desk drawer and took out a leather-bound folder, which he opened on the desk surface and turned to face her. "I ran a background check on you," he said. "Maggie Truesdale, 37, no record, bachelor's in behavioral science from UT Austin, class of 2011, graduated with distinction, 11 years in high-end hospitality. You have extremely consistent references and 0 professional complaints. Behavioral science." Maggie said, "I read people. You do more than read them." Vincent said, "My head of security has 2 decades in special operations and did not notice Gerald Fitch sitting at that bar. He did not notice the body language of the 2 men at the corner table. He did not notice what you noticed, and you noticed it while pouring water. People don't watch the person pouring the water." Maggie said, "That's the whole thing. They talk in front of us. They plan in front of us. We're furniture. You were never furniture." Vincent said, "You just allowed them to believe you were." He picked up a pen. "I'm going to offer you a position," he said. "The official title, for payroll purposes, will be Director of Client Relations for the Mara Group. The actual function will be attending my meetings, my dinners, my negotiations, and my events. You will sit quietly wherever I put you, and you will watch, and afterward you will tell me what you saw." He wrote a number on the notepad in front of him and turned it to face her. Maggie looked at it. "That's per year." Vincent said, "I'm aware of how annual salaries work." Maggie said, "There's a signing bonus." He wrote a second number. "I want your eyes, Ms. Truesdale. Everything else, you keep entirely to yourself. I don't need anything else from you." Maggie looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she looked up at Vincent Mara, the man who controlled freight corridors from Dallas to El Paso and who had not, in 11 years of watching him, ever once snapped his fingers at a member of the service staff. She picked up the pen. "When do we start?" she said. The transformation was not one that anyone in Maggie's previous life would have predicted, and not one that Maggie herself fully recognized until she was already inside it. Officially, she was a logistics consultant. Unofficially, she was something that had no clean title in any organizational chart. The first time she proved her worth in a new capacity. It was January, 8 weeks into the arrangement. Vincent had a meeting with a city procurement official named Garrett, who was angling for a renegotiated service contract on a port inspection schedule. Maggie sat in the corner of the conference room with a legal pad and a glass of water and said nothing. Afterward, she told Vincent that Garrett's left leg had been bouncing under the table for the full 40 minutes. Not with ordinary anxiety, but with the specific rhythm of someone monitoring a clock. She suggested that Garrett had somewhere he needed to be immediately after this meeting, and that someone was expecting a report on how the meeting had gone. Vincent pulled the contract off the table for 2 weeks. The following Thursday, Garrett was approached by an investigative journalist who had been tipped off from a source Maggie was not told about and did not ask about, that the official was simultaneously negotiating an identical contract with a competing logistics firm and had been billing both parties for the same inspection services for 14 months. 3 weeks after that, Vincent got the contract on his original terms. Maggie's confidence did not arrive all at once. It built the way competence builds incrementally, in small certifications, each one making the next one feel slightly more available. She had always known how to read a room. She had not known, until now, that reading rooms was a skill, had a market value, could be deployed as something other than private internal commentary during long shifts. She also, gradually, and then suddenly, stopped dressing like a woman who was trying to take up less space than she occupied. She had spent a decade wearing black and navy and dark gray, the hospitality uniform colors that doubled as camouflage. Because invisibility had been the job had changed. She let Vincent's office manager connect her with a tailor in Uptown who spent 2 appointments taking measurements and asking questions about what she wanted to project. Power, Maggie said. The second time the tailor asked, "I want to walk into a room and have people feel the air change." The tailor had smiled and written something down. The suits that arrived 4 weeks later were constructed in deep teal and charcoal, and a shade of amber that she had not known she could wear, in cuts that moved with her body, instead of negotiating with it. She wore them with low heels, and she kept her hair down. The capos who attended Vincent's meetings had laughed. Initially, quietly, carefully, in the way people laugh when they are not entirely sure whether laughter is safe. But they had laughed. She was aware of it. She catalogued it the same way she catalogued everything else, which is to say, she noted it, assigned it no emotional weight, and waited. The laughter stopped in February, after she identified a financial discrepancy in the organization's distribution accounts and traced it to a senior lieutenant who had been quietly building an exit fund for the better part of 18 months. She found it the way she found everything, by watching, by noticing that a man who should have been relaxed was performing relaxation rather than exhibiting it, and by then looking very carefully at whatever he was performing, relaxation about, the man was no longer employed. After that, meetings were very quiet when Maggie was in the room. The professional and the personal blurred, as it always does when 2 people spend enough late evenings in close proximity, working on something that requires absolute mutual trust. The first time she noticed it was a night in late February, sitting across a work table from Vincent at 11 p.m., with cold takeout Thai food and a spread of shipping manifests between them. When she looked up in the middle of a sentence and caught him watching her with an expression that had nothing to do with logistics, she finished the sentence anyway. But she noticed, the second time, she said, "You're doing it again." He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "I'm aware," he said. "It's a complication. Most things worth having are," Vincent said. "I work for you. You work with me," he said, carefully. "That's a different thing. And if it genuinely concerns you, I'll have Calvin draft an arrangement that clarifies the structural independence of your role. You've clearly been thinking about this since roughly the 4th week," he said. "You had just told me that a man I'd trusted for 6 years was lying about his offshore accounts. You were eating pad. See, Ew, with a plastic fork. And you looked. He paused. You looked like someone who had always known she was the smartest person in the room and had finally decided to stop pretending otherwise. Maggie was quiet for a moment. You are a deeply complicated individual, she said. Yes, said Vincent, but I'm honest about it. And I think he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, that you've spent long enough in rooms where people looked through you. I would like, if you'll permit it, to be the person who looks directly at you, for as long as you'll allow it. The kiss, when it came, was not timid. It was also not rushed. It had the quality of something that had been acknowledged, discussed, and decided upon, which was, Maggie thought, in keeping with both of their personalities. The annual Texas Commerce Gala was held in April, at a venue in downtown Dallas that Maggie had never entered except through the service entrance. This year, she walked in through the front. The invitation had come on heavy cream stock with engraved lettering, addressed to Ms. Margaret Truesdale, Director, Mara Group. The teal suit she wore had been made for exactly this moment, cut to fall in a line that made her feel, as she had requested, like a change in air pressure. She arrived with Vincent. He had not announced this in advance. He had simply offered her his arm in the parking structure, and she had taken it. And they had walked into the gala that way. The room noticed. She watched it happen. Because she always watched rooms. It was what she did. The ripple of recognition that moved through the crowd as people who had seen Maggie Truesdale clearing plates for a decade processed the fact that she was now walking in on the arm of the most powerful man in the room. She saw the hostesses and the bartenders and the junior staff register it fastest. Because people in service always know who has power, and they do math quickly. A man she recognized as a regional business associate stepped forward, Vincent. And this must be Maggie Truesdale. Vincent said, "She is the reason I am still in a position to attend this event." He said it simply, with no performance, which made it land harder than any announcement could have. She shook the man's hand. She was aware, in a calm and entirely deliberate way, of every set of eyes in the room. For 11 years, she had refined the art of not being seen. She understood it the way a musician understands an instrument. They have mastered the mechanics, the physics, the specific quality of the silence it produced. But she had been the one choosing the silence, and she had decided, some weeks ago, to choose something else. The invisible woman was not there anymore. In her place stood Maggie Truesdale, behavioral scientist, logistics consultant, and the most dangerous set of eyes in any room she entered. And she looked out at the assembled power of the city and felt, for the first time, in a very long time, entirely at home in her own visibility. The gala went on around her. She watched everything.